This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here's the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I'm Kevin Randle. Normally, I spend the first few minutes commenting on some outrage in the UFO community, but today I have two special guests, Dr. Jacques Vallée and Ms. Paula Harris, to tell us about an event that took place 2 years before the Roswell UFO crash. There were two witnesses to the original story, but later others were involved. But rather than hear me talk about it, I'm going to just bring on the guest. Anyone who's been around the UFO field for more than 10 minutes will know who Jacques Vallée is. He needs no introduction, but I'm going to provide one anyway. Jacques F. Vallée is a principal in Documatica Financial and a diversified investor. He earned a Bachelor Degree in mathematics from the Sorbonne, a Master's Degree in astrophysics from Lille University, and a PhD in computer science and artificial intelligence from Northwestern University in 1967. He's based in the Silicon Valley and has served as the founder and general partner of 5 venture funds, including NASA's Red Planet Capital. In his early career, Jacques worked at the Paris Observatory and at the astronomy department at the University of Texas in Austin, where he co-developed the first computer-based map of the planet Mars. Moving to California after management positions with Shell and RCA, he implemented with Jake. I'm into the Jacques mode here. Jake Feinler, the first network information center on Arpanet, and later served as a principal investor for DARPA and NSF. Jacques published several textbooks about computer networking and has maintained a long-term interest in unidentified flying objects, currently serving as an expert on the expert committee of the French CNES. As tasked with studying the reports of UFOs. He received the Jules Verne Prize for his first science fiction novel. I'm going to talk to him about that in a minute. In French, he resides between San Francisco and Paris. He has 2 children and 3 grandchildren. And anyone who has been around the field for more than 20 minutes knows the name of Paula Harris. And I'll give her background here. She is an Italian-American photojournalist and investigative reporter in the field of extraterrestrial-related phenomenon research. She is also a widely published freelance writer, especially in Europe. She produces the annual Star Work USA conference in Laughlin, Nevada. Paula has studied extraterrestrial-related phenomenon since 1979 and is on the personal terms with many of the leading researchers in the field. From 1980 to 1986, she assisted Dr. J.L.N. Hynek with his UFO investigations and has interviewed many top military witnesses concerning their involvement in the government truth embargo. In 1997, Ms. Harris met and interviewed Colonel Philip Corso in Roswell, New Mexico, and became personal friend and confidant. She was instrumental in having his book, The Day After Roswell, for which she wrote the introduction or the preface translated into Italian. She consequently brought the Colonel Corso to Italy. I'm having trouble with my English today for some reason. Colonel Corso to Italy for editorial group Futuro, and the publisher of, and it's the name, I'm sure it's the name Day After Roswell in Italian, so I'll just say The Day After Roswell. And Corso was present for many TV appearances and 2 conferences. She returned to Roswell in the summer of 2003 for the American debut of her book, Connecting the Dots, Making Sense of the UFO Phenomenon. Because of her international perspective on extraterrestrial-related phenomena, Paula has consulted with many researchers about the best avenues for planetary disclosure with emphasis on the big picture and stressing the historical connection. She was a close friend of the late Monsignor Padre Corrado Balsieri and assisted in filming the Italian witness, including the Monsignor, for the Disclosure Project for the May 9th, 2001 press conference held, I guess, in Washington, D.C., if I remember correctly. She is instrumental in bringing to Italy Robert Dean, Dr. Stephen Greer, Linda Moulton Howe, Dr. Richard Boylan, Russell Targ, Travis Walton, Daryl Sims, Helmut Lamnier, Michael Lindemann, Nick Pope, Bill Hamilton, Ryan Wood, and Carlos Diaz, and of course, John Mack. Her new nonprofit association, Starworks Italia, will continue to bring speakers to Italy and promote disclosure and exopolitical dialogue worldwide. Paola lives in Rome and Boulder, Colorado. I'll get to that later, too, because I grew up in the Denver area, and has a master's degree in education. She teaches history and photojournalism and online classes at exopolitics for Dr. Michael Sala's Exopolitics Institute, for which she is an international liaison director. Dr. Vallée, Ms. Harris, thank you so much for taking time to join me on A Different Perspective.
It's a pleasure to speak with you.
I think the best way to start this, and I think Paola, the best way is briefly, what is the story we're talking about here? What is the Trinity book about?
Well, I can begin because I started working on it about 9 years ago. I had heard about a crash where two little Indian boys, they were described as two little Indian boys, were the witnesses. I had read about it in the Socorro Journal, and I was living in Italy at the time. I've since moved back to the Boulder area here. But I thought right away, Kevin, like normal, I thought, well, why aren't my colleagues jumping on this? Since the witnesses are still alive, they obviously know the location, and there's all these details. Well, nobody did. When I moved back in 2007, I forgot about it, and then in about 2012, I got this telephone call from the son of the pilot that did the overflight of that particular situation. And he gave me the telephone number of the 6-year-old. These were of the 7-year-old. These were 7 and 9-year-old kids, and they were Hispanic, not Native American. And I began to research it, and I started doing it by going on location, by flying to Washington State and getting the testimony of the 7-year-old. Good thing I did, because he passed away of diabetes. So we have him on film. We have his testimony. And the 9-year-old is getting older. So I started doing that, and then I'll let Jacques jump in, because 4 years ago, he was doing the same thing, and we met up, and we've been researching it on location ever since.
You mean Dr. Vallée was interested in the same case? He was doing research on the same case?
Right.
Well, I should back up a little bit and maybe eat some humble pie here, because as in contrast to Paola, I have not really spent much time looking at UFO crashes. And the reason was that, I have a good excuse, which is that I was doing all kinds of other things, looking for patterns in databases and investigating cases around the world, and especially in France, and trying to merge the French cases with the American cases and so on, when I was working with Dr. Hynek. But people have accused me of not paying attention to Roswell and to other cases like that, and that's a valid, accusation. I felt that there wasn't, and when I was talking to colleagues in science and so on, I had trouble convincing them that this was important, because many of the witnesses were anonymous, or if they were not, they hadn't witnessed the actual arrival of the object. They came in, sometime later. You had to reconstruct the history, and much of the evidence had been taken away, by the military, and was secret. And it was so it looked like the real data was pretty much inaccessible or very, very hard to work with for a scientist. One scientist told me, well, those are interesting stories, but you haven't given me anything I can take to my lab. And that's generally, it's not completely true, but it's generally true. As time went on, though,
let me interrupt here. Let me interrupt here because I think we're a little bit ahead of ourselves. And what I would like to know is, either one of you, what exactly is the story we're telling here? Let's get the facts out.
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
Showing you what my own path has been and how I came to this one, and why this story is unique. I had worked with a friend who was from New Mexico, and had started to reinvestigate some of the crash cases in New Mexico, including Roswell. And he convinced me to start looking at it, and he introduced me to this case. This case was particularly important because it took place 2 years before Roswell, as Paola said. We're looking at a little town called San Antonio, which is about 20 miles north of where the first atomic bomb exploded, and where two... we have to go back to those times. Most adults who were in age of fighting were still in uniform, even though this was the end of the war in Europe. The war in Japan was continuing. You have two little kids who are essentially doing much of the work on the property owned by their father, or the father of one of the two. And that includes driving the truck, even though the eldest kid was 9-year-old. They drive the truck over to this property, which is 80,000 acres. They take care of the cattle, they take care of the fences and so on. And then on that particular day, an object comes out of nowhere and crashes on top of their head. I mean, it literally comes over, hits a communication tower, which is on the property, but it's really part of the complex of White Sands and Alamogordo, Air Force Base. So it's really watching over that entire territory. The object bumps into the tower, damages the tower, and proceeds to crash. But it didn't disintegrate the way an airplane would have done. It made a controlled crash landing under power, dug up a trench in the landscape all the way to a rise in the terrain where it made a turn and then came to rest. The only damage was one panel from that object, which was obviously a metal object, sort of egg-shaped, and rested there. The kids rushed to help, thinking that, again, the term flying saucer didn't exist. I mean, Roswell was still 2 years in the future. And they rushed to see if they could help.
Dr. Vallée, I need to interrupt here. We've got to take a break. Got to take a break and pay a few bills, I guess, that sort of thing. When we come back, we'll pick up the story there and get into some more of the details. The book is Trinity, The Best Kept Secret by Dr. Jacques Vallée and Paula Harris, available at Amazon as well as everywhere else, I suppose. You are listening to A Different Perspective on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. We'll be right back after this, so please stick around. I am here with both Jacques Vallée and Paola Harris were talking about Trinity, the best kept secret. And when we took our break, I think we just gotten the craft crashed into the ground intact, more or less intact, and two young boys, 7 and 9 years old, had witnessed this accident. Jacques, you were expanding on that, so I'll throw it back to you here.
Well, what was unique and really, as I said, I had been somewhat away from studies of actual crashes because there wasn't that much evidence I could take that would be convincing to my colleagues. In this case, we have a number of very unique situations. First, as I just mentioned, the two witnesses were there before the object arrived. They saw it arrive. It literally crashed over their heads. They rushed to help, thinking it was an airplane accident. And remember, the war was in the minds of everybody at that point, and they knew that the first thing you need to do is provide help to anyone who's been in such an accident. So they rushed forward. They realized very quickly that this was not an airplane, and the little creatures they saw were not pilots. The other unique element was that they knew the territory very well. This is not like somebody going to Argentina or to Mexico for a couple of days to investigate a case, not knowing the language or the situation or the geography and so on, and which is always questionable. Here, they lived there. They were trusted by their parents to take care of the cattle. They were well equipped. They knew the territory. They knew they were on horseback. They could travel very quickly. They had binoculars because they had to read the brands on the cattle from a distance to make sure that the herd was in good shape and so on. That's what they did. So we have a very unusual situation there where we have the best possible witnesses. When there was fire, there was the vegetation was on fire. There was smoke. They got to, so it was somewhat of a chaotic scene. They got to about 200 feet from the object, and then they saw that through that opening that had been created when the object hit the tower, they could see three creatures inside. So we have, just the first day, we have this abundance of description, of evidence, of tangible material data. The Army is going to notice this case. They are going to send a detachment to investigate and to take away this craft. The kids are going to be there for the next 8 days, and they will be able to provide a detailed description of everything that the military did to recover this so-called weather balloon. So, I'll let Paola develop, what happened after that.
Well, let me ask a question here quickly. Did it bother either of you that the witnesses were so young at the time of the event?
No, on the contrary. I think most accident investigators will tell you that very often kids that age are the best possible witnesses. They may not have the technical vocabulary to describe something, but they don't add their own impressions. An adult will tend to build a story around it. He wants to be helpful, and so he or she, will describe things that were not the actual facts of the case, but their own impression or deduction from it. The kids don't try to build up a story of what happened or how it happened or why. They will tell you, it came from there, it bumped into this, it crashed, I lost sight of it, then there was a smoke, and we went there, and this is what we saw, and don't ask me to tell you what it was.
But the problem with that analysis is, if you're interviewing kids who've just witnessed an accident, that may be true, but you're talking to men who have lived literally decades after the event. So doesn't that kind of destroy the idea that the kids' memories would be accurate? They wouldn't have added anything to it because the interviews took place so much later?
So in analyzing the transcripts, which I've done again and again, and thanks to Paola, we have transcripts that were done, very professionally of both of them, and we can cross-index them. They don't describe exactly the same thing because, again, the age difference and the background difference. But that's what you expect. You don't expect witnesses to use exactly the same words in the same sequence. But you can reconstruct what happens, and then we have two independent views of the whole thing that give us, additional strength to the testimony. Number one, there was a pilot who saw all this happen, which is, again, a third element that is unique, that we don't have that in Roswell, we don't have that in Valensole or in Socorro or in other places. He was coming in for a landing at Alamogordo, which is just south of White Sands, of the big White Sands military base. He was asked by his controller to take a look at the tower because they had lost communication and they were wondering what had happened to the tower. So he flew over the tower that had just been hit and described that there was some damage to the tower, that there was a fire in the vegetation, in the bushes. The object was not on fire, contrary to what one book mentions. Which is understandable, but it was a creosote and the cactus and the vegetation that was very dry that was burning. There was a lot of smoke. He saw the object from the air, and he saw what he called two little Indian boys. Well, they were not Indian, although Jose has a grandmother who was an Apache leader, in fact, in the area. But they were Hispanic, but he saw the two boys with their horses. So we know the boys are not making up a story. He described all that in the military report, and we believe that
you have a copy of the military report.
We don't have access to the report. This would be a report from 1945, but his son knew the story, and his son independently described what his father had told him.
So you didn't talk to the pilot himself. I think his name was, Brothry?
Brody.
Yes, Brody.
So you didn't talk to him, you talked to his son.
That's correct. Paola spoke to his son.
Okay.
Yes, he was.
Yes, so we must add another thing.
He was dead by then. Many of the adult witnesses had died by the time the reason the book is called Trinity, the Best Kept Secret, is that both sides kept the secret. The army never spoke about it. They took it away. They turned it over to a lab somewhere. We think we have an idea of where it went and why nobody knew about it. And then the kids kept it secret for 70 years for their own reason. They never came forward. They didn't come forward when Roswell took place. You'd expect they would say, hey, we saw something too. Get me on TV. I want to testify. They were hiding the information they had for some reasons that we can go into that were very good reasons, which actually lends a lot of credibility to what they say now. So there was corroborating evidence from other places. The three people went inside the object eventually, including a state policeman and the father of Jose Padilla. Jose Padilla is still alive. He can testify. And in analyzing the transcript, there is some I've had some experience with that, analyzing transcripts of, for example, psychic descriptions and other types of testimony. It's very interesting to see that they go from the past to the present tense, as if all of a sudden they were there. And I've had experiences in my about that age, and between the time when I was 3 and the time when I was 5, I was in the middle of a war. I grew up in a place that was bombed 17 times in World War II.
Well, let me interrupt
the
you.
access from Paris to Normandy.
Let me interrupt here. Let me interrupt here because I think we're getting a little bit far afield, and I don't have a lot of time, and we haven't given Paula a chance to talk about much of this. The boys saw the craft. They went home and reported to their parents. The men came back. They looked at the craft with the state policeman. Paula, can you pick it up there? Was the Army involved? When did the Army show up?
The Army Air Force at the time. You know that the Army wasn't the Army until 2 years later. But the thing that we have to look at here is that Jacques and I have been back on the location. We've been back at least 8 times, and when we have a witness like Jose, who talks about Sheriff Apodaca and knows every name of everybody in his town, and relives the thing right in front of you, we know these people are telling the truth. The difference is that they didn't talk about it because they're watching the recovery, and I think this is where you want to go, Jacques. They're watching the recovery. These 2 little boys, they were told not to go back. They're watching their recovery, and because they want to go in there and get a souvenir. They want to go inside the craft and pull something out, get a souvenir, but they have to wait until the boys, and they were young boys that were doing the cleanup. I don't think anybody expected something to fall 1 month after the atomic bomb explosion, 20 miles from ground zero. There was only one watering hole. That was the Owl Bar and Cafe. We've been there so many times. It's where Oppenheimer and all the scientists had their cabins. The boys knew all of the people who went in there. Jose bought the hamburger for the cafe. He was driving a truck at 9. And so here he knows who's cleaning it up. He's there. They know the people. They're waiting until the young guys go back to the Owl Bar because they put it on a flatbed truck. They're about to take it out. So Jose and Remy wanted a souvenir. So Jose goes inside the craft, sees this plaque on the wall, asks Remy for the crowbar, and he pulls it off. So there is a piece to this. There's the location, the witnesses, and a piece, which is very unusual for any kind of case. Where is it now? The piece is with Jacques. It's in California. It will be donated to the world in about 10 years. It's going to a university, and it's a substantial size piece. It's being analyzed. So it has all of these scientific kinds of things we can look at. And the book, and I'm going to tell you this, Kevin, it's mostly a history book. It is so precisely written by Jacques.
Well,
and
let me
interrupt
here because I've got to take another break. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about that history in the book. So we'll get onto that. The book, of course, is Trinity, the Best Kept Secret. We're talking about 2 young boys who witnessed this. Apparently, we're down to 1 living witness who actually saw the stuff itself and was involved in is observing the recovery operation. But there's a lot of other history in the book, and I wanted to talk about some of that because I found that very interesting as well. And so when we come back, we'll do that. You are listening to A Different Perspective on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. We will be back right after this, so please stick around. I am joined by Jacques Vallée and Paola Harris. We're talking about Trinity, the best kept secret. And when we went away, we were just getting into the history, some of the history in the book, and I wanted to talk about that. I have actually a couple of comments about that. First, I was concerned about the discussion of the Aurora, Texas crash from 1897 and the emphasis put on that. I was there in 1971. I think I may have been one of the first people in the modern era to actually go to Aurora, Texas. And I talked to the people at the Wise County Historical Society, which is Aurora, Texas being in Wise County. And they told me the event didn't take place. It was a hoax. They said 2 histories of Wise County had been written within a decade of the crash. I think one coming out in 1910, one of them coming out in 1906 or 1907. Histories of the county, and neither one mentioned this UFO crash. And yet we have in your book a brief section about the Aurora, Texas crash. And I wonder what convinced you that there was some legitimacy to that event.
So one thing you do, when you're doing an analysis of a case, is you try to put it in the context of other stories that can teach you something about the background, the history, the coincidences, the correlations, and so on. Both in terms of the social reaction to the story, and also in terms of the physical evidence. The case in Aurora, I was the first to publish it. I was Dr. Hynek pointed it to me. He knew that I was interested in the history of the phenomenon in general, going back many years or decades. And he mentioned it. I researched it. We found the original article, and I published it, and it was forgotten, and then it was rediscovered by people who wanted to investigate it, and I'm glad that you took the time to do that. I think every new investigation is a contribution. I saw all the positive things about it, and I'm aware of all the negatives. My role in that catalog of cases that I mentioned in the book is simply to put this particular story against the background of other cases. And I'm not saying that they've been validated. I mean, there is another case, a case that happened before Kenneth Arnold in 1947, where everybody tells me, no, it's a hoax, it's a hoax, it's a hoax. Well, it's a hoax, but it has all the earmarks of later cases that we know are not hoaxes. So the question is, as a scientist, is let me try to get a sample from that so-called hoax and test it. And that's the proof of the pudding. Now, in the case of Aurora, yes, I'm well aware that it was written up as amusing, sort of cowboy-like, early Americana, very colorful, and people can laugh at it. But MUFON has done an investigation there with people from an aircraft company, and they've published extensive reports that I've been reading. They interrogated some of the witnesses who were still alive, who were neighbors of the men who owned the property where this crashed, and gave them a report, gave them testimony. And so then they dug up a number of artifacts. I have not tested them because I don't have access to them. But if I have access to them, I'd like to test them.
But here's the problem with that.
Pudding.
Here's the problem with that. When 1971 was when I was there, prior to MUFON showing up, before Hayden Hughes, I think it was, showed up, I talked to those same people, and they said it didn't happen. There's one guy whose hands were very gnarled and distorted by, I think, rheumatoid arthritis. And he told me that, no, it didn't happen. He was alive at the time. I talked to these people. And later on, I see this guy doing interviews on television, the same guy saying, yes, yes, it happened, and giving a very, very vivid description of what had happened. My point simply is, we have no documentation supporting the 1897 crash. We have one newspaper article that fit into the whole concept of the 1897 airship. We have witnesses who said it didn't happen and then saying it did. We have documentation from the time that doesn't mention it should have. And I think that kind of leads us to the point that this probably did not take place.
In this kind of investigation, you have to take a lot of different things into account. If you read in the book, I put the case in San Antonio in the context of two other cases, Socorro, in which you can find a lot of people who say it didn't happen, or it didn't happen this way, or it was a perfectly ordinary thing. There's a recent article in a UFO magazine that says that Socorro wasn't a UFO. Okay, and the case in Vallée, which was investigated by 5 different agencies of the French government for security reasons, and where the testimony of the witness is being challenged in exactly the same terms, but where we know that it in fact happened.
Let's talk about Socorro, because I did a book called Encounter in the Desert, which was an analysis of the Socorro sighting. And I'm with you on this one. I think this is a very good case for an extraterrestrial spacecraft landing. I don't
know if it's extraterrestrial. I mean, there is something that landed that wasn't ours.
I'm taking the step toward extraterrestrial. I'm doing that myself. But there are some problems with the case. For example, the description of the symbol on the side of the case, which I've never understood how this thing got so out of proportion. There were 2 symbols described. One was an inverted V with 3 lines through it, and one was what I call the umbrella symbol, which was an arc over an arrow, an inverted V with a shaft to it looking like an arrow. Lonnie Zamora, on the night that this happened, 5 minutes after the craft took off, he drew that symbol on a scrap of paper. That scrap of paper was in the Project Blue Book files. And I think in your book, you now endorse the inverted V with the 3 lines through it. And I'm wondering how we get from the dichotomy of what Lonnie Zamora described and wrote on the night that this happened into this idea of the 3 Vs. The 3 lines through the V. I wonder how we got to that discrepancy.
Well, I described the 3 different versions of the symbol. The Socorro police decided they didn't want to publish the actual symbol, and they made up another symbol that they gave to the press. So they were the ones obfuscating the actual case. One of the 3 symbols comes from a handwritten letter from Dr. Hynek, who the day he interrogated Lonnie Zamora. So all I can do is give you the 3 different versions of the symbol.
Well,
I have some idea about what the symbol actually is, by the way, and what it represents and what it's linked to, but I want to keep that to myself for a while too, because again, once you start rumors, and the police knew that there would be lots of different rumors, and that's why they wanted to make sure that if some other witness came up and could describe the symbol, that would be one way to validate the veracity of the testimony. So that's why it was done.
Well, I know why it was done. It was to keep copycats from talking about the crash.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And 2 of the copycats were a guy named, I think, Kais and Kratzner, who were from Dubuque, Iowa, who claimed to have seen the object, take off. And I know in the book you talk about their testimony a little bit. I believe that they were not telling the truth. And the reason I believe that is because they describe the craft in not just the article that appeared in I think it's the Dubuque Herald Telegraph, and an interview done by Ralph DeGraw some years later about the craft having a row of round silvery windows on it, which of course Lonnie Zamora never described. So
right.
doesn't that...
Well, that goes back to the adult testimony. I'd rather have a 12-year-old or a 9-year-old describe what he saw. Again, the most difficult thing about that period is to bring the reader in writing our book, bring the reader to the conditions of the time. I mean, why would a 9-year-old be driving a truck? Okay, why would they have binoculars that were just as good as the binoculars of the Army Air Force? Why would they? So you look for correlations, you look for, and then you look for the conditions. I've investigated a number of cases where the witnesses were the first reaction is, no, nothing happened, I haven't seen anything, leave me alone, okay? And then when you find out that either they were instructed to say that, which is the case in many military cases, as I think you know very well, or they're afraid, or they've been hassled by journalists and they've been ridiculed, they've been called liars. That includes, remember the case of Herb Schirmer, where his wife divorced him when he came up, when he described his case, his observation, and then he had to leave the police. He had to run away essentially from the town where he lived.
Well, let me interrupt.
So no wonder, Kevin, no wonder witnesses are going to say, no, I didn't see anything. And then you gain their confidence, which is what I try to do in my methodology, if you gain their confidence, then you begin to get the real story.
Well, I just wanted to interrupt here because I wanted to explain to the audience here that Herb Schirmer was a police officer in Ashland, Nebraska, who saw a landed UFO in 1967. He believed the story is he was taken on board under hypnotic regression. He remembered the abduction phenomenon, and then he was investigated by the University of Colorado's study in the Condon Committee study, and I wanted the audience to get that context.
Absolutely.
What was going on.
Yeah, I spoke to him and had a long, personal, emotional discussion with him, as you usually get into when you study those cases. This is not just a report of a car accident. And again, remember that I grew up in the middle of World War II. I saw airplanes being shot. I saw pilots falling with their parachute, being killed in the air. I saw that when I was a kid. So I understand what witnesses of extreme conditions, when they were kids, that if you bring them back to that time, they're going to tell the truth. I can tell you exactly where I was. I was 4 years old, okay? And fortunately, I wasn't hurt psychologically because I never saw, tragedy up close. And my parents, my father had been in World War I, was a very courageous man. He knew when there was danger or not. So I felt protected when I saw that, but I did see it.
Well, let me interrupt here because I'm going to have to take one more break. The book is Trinity, the Best Kept Secret by Jacques Vallée and Paula Harris. I'm sorry, Paula, we haven't gotten much to you on this discussion here.
No, that's okay.
I apologize for that. We'll get back. And when we come back, I wanted to ask Jacques Vallée about something he said about Project Blue Book that I found very fascinating, and it seemed to corroborate something that I have in a book that I called UFOs in the Deep State. We will be back right after that with Jacques Vallée and Paula Harris talking about the Trinity, the Best Kept Secret. So please stick around. listening to A Different Perspective on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. I'm sitting here with Jacques Vallée and Paula Harris, and I should say we're not sitting together in the same room, but we are all together on various communication devices. Before we get into other parts, there was something that intrigued me in the book, that you said that Project Sign began in 1945. Well, we know officially it began in 1948, but we also know that there was Army Air Force's investigations prior to that. And you suggested there were secret Project Blue Book files that are not part of the overall Project Blue Book things that we've been seeing. Is that did I get that correct?
Okay, so Project Blue Book essentially was unclassified. I mean, the 12,000 or 15,000 cases, are unclassified. The only thing that has been removed is the names of witnesses. People have told me that there was a classified side project that contained a few dozen cases. I was not aware of that. I don't know if it's true. What I do know is that in the index to Blue Book, which we had at Northwestern, I mean, Dr. Hynek had essentially a carbon copy of all the files. And by the way, any scientist who would have wanted, to research the phenomenon could have had access to that without a security clearance. The Air Force would have been delighted to have scientists become involved. And I think the only one who did was Dr. MacDonald. The others were pontificating about what was in the files without ever looking at the files, including Dr. Sagan. So they were in the index, which I went through, of course, when I reconstructed the database for the entire Project Blue Book on my own, with help from my wife. And there were a number of cases that were flagged with a star, with an asterisk, and there was no corresponding file, no corresponding papers in records that I had access to. So I asked Dr. Hynek, and he said, "Oh, well, there are a few cases that are classified." And I would say, "Well, what happened?" And he said, "Well, they are classified not because of what the UFO was, but because of where the witness was, or because of the instrument that was used." And I said, "Well, how come?" And he said, "Well, if the UFO was detected with a radar that's a prototype, that's a classified radar, we don't care whether there was a UFO or not. I mean, the radar is classified. Everything about that case is going to be classified the same way. And you've been in the military, you know how that works. There was a case that I absolutely love, where this was quite an early case. This woman in Alaska writes to the Air Force because she's in her garden and she looks up, and the sky is still light even though it's dark on the ground, and she sees something that is flying. She doesn't hear any noise. It's very bright, and it's going east. And this is, it's in a steady course. It's not a meteor, it's not a bird, it's not an airplane, it's not anything. And so the case is classified. And when I found out what it was, I asked Dr. Hynek, why did they classify that? And he said, well, they knew what it was. It was a U-2. They were not about to say that they knew what it was. And the simplest thing for Project Blue Book to do was to classify it.
Well, the reason I asked,
it was classified and it was unidentified.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because in preparing the book UFOs in the Deep State, I talked to Daniel Sheehan, and he talked about a classified section of Project Blue Book, which I'd never heard about as well, and how he had gotten access because he was working with President-elect Carter answer his questions about UFOs, and he had access for a short period of time to some of the classified materials, supposedly from Project Blue Book. And when I saw that reference in your book, I thought it might be some corroboration for what Dan Sheehan had told me, some additional corroboration.
I think I heard the same story, and I'm like you. I'm a little bit puzzled by that. I was told there were, no, it's not a lot of cases, but it's a few dozen cases. I have not seen them. The cases I'm aware of, and later I was able to see them. They were all like that Alaska case. That was something that where they knew what it was, or they didn't care. But the classification had to do with the instrument that was used. There was a case that was where there was a boat off the coast of Korea that saw something and reported it, and that was classified. Well, it was classified because they were about 1 mile away from the coast of North Korea. So those were not just your ordinary fishermen.
Well, let me interrupt here, Paula. You talked to Sabrina Padillo about her experiences.
Right. Well, this
quickly,
is what happens when you keep working on a story. Yeah, this is what happens when you keep working on a story for 9 years. I mean, Jacques and I had already done the first draft of the book, and we went back to the area, and we were sitting with Jose, and he said, well, my niece was living with my father at the time, and when he told us that there was somebody else in the house, we said, does she know anything about this? And he goes, oh, yeah, she'd come out of the farmhouse and go to the area. Well, right away, in 1 year, we had to question her and got her testimony, which corroborated a lot of what Jose said, but we realized she had a lot of other information that Jose didn't know about. For instance, we haven't talked about all the different metals involved here, but Sabrina being, between 5 and 7, she says she walked on the property, saw where the crash happened. It was all black. The vegetation never grew. She was told not to go there. She saw Army coming in the back door during those years. This was from 1945 to about 1955. She said she was playing with these strips of metal, she said, because they didn't have any toys, but the grandfather would give her these strips of metal that she would crunch up, and they go back to the same shape. She said we would think it was funny, and she will talk about it to this day and describe it perfectly. We never realized that the father, Faustino, went back on his own and found a couple of strips of memory metal. We knew the boys had picked up what they thought was angel hair and put it in a 10-pound bag and trimmed the Christmas trees with it. She verified without Jose saying anything that she had it in her bedroom, that she had it in a little plastic bag that was all lit up in different colors. And we're not sure what that is. I mean, it seems to be some kind of derivative of fiber optics. I mean, she's verifying the actual materials. And these kids can't make that up at that age. I mean, they don't know what would have fallen out of that particular crash. And she describes it as hurting her hands. It would pinch her hands. She would say it would bite my hands. So if you read the book, you have her exact words, because that's what I do. I can't, just put it in my words. They're the exact transcripts of everybody, the two boys, and now this year, Sabrina, who's the third witness. But I want to add something else, Kevin. When I was talking to Remy, he explained to me that he had gotten the governor of Washington State elected. Her name was Dixie Lee, and that she worked for the Atomic Energy Commission. And as a thank you to him, she showed him his file. And so Jacques and I have talked about this. That file did not go into any Blue Book file, Air Force file, or whatever. In 1945, that file went into the files of the Atomic Energy Commission. She said, because he said, she turned over the pages and there was my case.
Well, but with Sabrina, the problem is she was born in 1953. So she wasn't a witness to the crash or any of that. She came about later on.
Yes, and she came about later on, and but she lived there. She lived with the grandfather. They had adopted her.
Understood,
So we've been to the place, the house. She just went over the hill, and she saw the site was still blackened. And actually, all the vegetation has changed, too, from that site. But she also...
Does she have any of the metal left? I mean, we talk about lots of this metal being circulated in the family members. Were we able to find any of that metal?
No, we couldn't find that metal, but we're hoping the book will bring out people who have the fiber, that angel hair stuff, because what the boys did was give it to the neighbors. Because they decorated their windows and their Christmas tree with it. So we're hoping that somebody from back then looks through their Christmas decorations and will bring out a plastic bag of that stuff. There was so much of it, they gave it to the town. So if somebody reads the book from that time, will come out. Maybe they saved it. You know how you save your Christmas decorations. Jacques and I are hoping somebody will come out of the woodwork and say, yeah, I was, riding over there and found this stuff. No, after all these years and all the secrets kept, there isn't any of the memory metal. And that particular farmhouse was burnt down by one of the relatives. So it isn't, that same structure isn't standing there anymore.
So we've lost an opportunity to analyze any of the metal from the craft. Did you find it odd?
From that they found on the craft, we have the bracket that Jose took as a souvenir. We have that. I mean, that's not something we could forget about.
Well, but the analysis doesn't take us into the realm of the extraterrestrial. It's basically terrestrially metal that was. The analysis showed it basically terrestrial metal.
Jacques can elaborate on that. They're still working on it.
But the point I have here is we have witness testimony, but we don't have any documentation. Nobody wrote a letter. Nobody had a diary or anything like that. So we're relying on the testimonies of the two boys, both of whom you were able to talk to, but we didn't get any of the adults who were around at the time, and we haven't found any of the military personnel or that kind of thing. With Roswell, we've got all those other witnesses that can help us understand.
Well, I think we shouldn't be comparing this to anything else, and I don't think you can compare Roswell to anything else either. I think that this is a new case. It should be looked at. I think that you loved the history of the book. Jacques is an excellent writer, so he included a lot of that. And I don't think that in investigations, it stands alone. I mean, it stands alone. And as far as the area, the Socorro case, the Lonnie Zamora case is mentioned there. And ironically enough, Jose was related to Zamora's wife. So all those people there, if you spend enough time there, they have a lot of secrets they're keeping.
Well, let me interrupt you there because we're out of time. I wanted to do 2 hours. Unfortunately, we had to cram it into an hour, so we didn't get into some of the things I wanted to talk about. There was so much more to talk about in the book. I want to thank both of you, Jacques and you, Paula, for coming on the program and sharing your experiences and your investigations with us here today. The book is called Trinity, a Best Kept Secret. I will have more information about this at my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. I appreciated their time and effort in chatting with us today. I will be back in about 167 hours. I'll be talking to Kathleen Marden about the Barney and Betty Hill abduction and their experiences there. And she's got an update to her book, Captured, that apparently has more information in it. Once again, I want to thank you all for tuning in to A Different Perspective on the X Zone Broadcast Network. Thanks for tuning in.